Joining us now, Democratic Congressman from Connecticut, Jim Himes. He is the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
Do you have a sense that Israel might strike again? I mean, it's unclear whether the intended targets, whether it was a successful attack to kill the intended targets.
Yeah, look, there's no reason to believe that they won't continue to go after the leadership of Hamas. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at the conflict in the region, but it's sort of hard to look at the attacks that Israel has taken, the original attacks against Hezbollah, the attacks inside Iran on Hamas leadership, the bringing of Iran down to its knees. It's sort of hard to look at that and say that the prime minister and Israel haven't, at least speaking tactically and kinetically, had some real successes. So yeah, I would assume that they're going to continue to go after. And look, they've already paid the cost, right? The prime minister showed that he was over the idea of a negotiated peace, and pretty hard to go back on that once you've taken a shot, tried to kill the people that you were negotiating with.
So what's the U.S. role in this? If Israel attacks Qatar again, where does that leave the U.S.? That's our largest military base. They've also been an ally in the Middle East. You know, there's some questions about whether they should be hosting Hamas and other groups, but they do, and they allow that negotiation to happen there. What should the U.S. role be if Israel continues to do so?
Yeah, I mean, and Katie, and let's back up on Qatar for a moment here. Remember, the Hamas so-called political leadership is in Qatar because we wanted them there.
Back in 2007,
Israel
right?
acquiesced, you know, we wanted a group there that we could monitor and negotiate with. So, you know, let's be a little easier on the Qataris here. And as you point out, we have a major air base there. It's pretty darn embarrassing when we get told a few minutes in advance that that Israeli warplanes are going to attack one of our allies in the Middle East. The Qataris in the Gulf look at the United States and say, hey, are you guys relevant here? Which is a pretty ugly place to be in the Middle East. So, you know, tactically, I think, I hope that the Secretary of State and Donald Trump in his supposedly tense conversations with the Prime Minister made it clear that we need to be a part of these conversations. And secondly, in bigger picture, Katie, you know, the United States needs to start using its power and its influence to do precisely what Donald Trump told us that he could do during the campaign, which is to bring these wars to a close, and this war in particular. You know, the human tragedy in Gaza is unacceptable, and the damage that is being done to the state of Israel's perception every day that this war goes on in the world. In New York City, you probably saw the poll. In New York City, more residents of New York City, one of the biggest Jewish cities on the planet, think unfavorably about Israel than ever before. So President Trump finally needs to get serious about using his influence to bring this war to an end.
How would he do that?
Look, he has a huge amount of sway with the prime minister. In his first term and lately, he has given the prime minister everything that the prime minister has asked for. So if I were the president, I would call up the prime minister and say, you've got 3 weeks. You know, figure it out. We'll put together a military coalition of Gulf states. There'll be a ton of money behind it. There will be soldiers. We will lock down Gaza, but the status quo is not acceptable. Too many Palestinians are dying. Israel becomes more and more of a pariah state, and the region remains very tense. You know, I know that if Donald Trump got serious with the prime minister, look, peace in the Middle East is a huge challenge, but that would be a darn good first step.
Let me push back on that. Netanyahu is facing his own criminal charges. He was in court just the other day, ahead of or right after the Doha strikes. He's got his own interests, and there have been questions about whether he really does listen to Donald Trump, especially because he has the far right that is keeping him in power and keeping him, you know, potentially out of prison. So how does Donald Trump exactly exert influence over somebody who, and I don't know, might not have the interest of Israel and even the relationship of Israel between the United States and in the forefront of his mind? I don't know that, but that is certainly the criticism that's out there. That's the question that's out there.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. Look, the prime minister obviously has real concerns about his own freedom and the situation in his trials. He's got huge political concerns, right? When the dust finally settles on this conflict, for the first time in a serious way, Israel is going to say, how did this happen in the first place? How did the most vaunted intelligence community on the planet next to the United States allow for October 7th to happen? There's going to be an after-action review that, in my humble opinion, is not going to reflect terribly well on the prime minister. However, to answer your question, it is the United States States that provides the vast bulk of the weaponry that Israel uses. It is the United States who, up to now, has acquiesced under the Trump administration and the first Trump administration to everything that the prime minister wanted. Now, if I'm Netanyahu and Donald Trump calls me up and says, hey, you've got 2 weeks, you know what I think about? I think about the fact that we've seen that movie probably 4 or 5 times now with respect to the Russians. So I'm not sure the prime minister believes him. But look, if Donald Trump wanted to bring Prime Minister Netanyahu into a different place, a place of actually genuinely seeking a negotiated solution to this conflict, he could do it. He's got the cards. He would just have a little bit of a credibility problem for all the reasons that you pointed out.
I'd love to ask you about a conversation I was having with your counterpart in the Senate last week, Senator Warner, who is the ranking member of Intel on the Senate side of things. He said he is extraordinarily worried, enormously concerned was his word, about the undermining of our intelligence community's independence almost on a daily basis, he said. He said that Donald Trump's undermining of allies should, and I'll quote him, scare the hell out of you. Are you in that camp as well?
Yes, I am. Certainly on the first point, which is, of course, I'm Mark Warner's counterpart in the House. And,
yeah, no,
you know,
when
you see the head of the National Security Agency fired because apparently Laura Loomer didn't take a shine to him, when you see the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency fired shortly after the DIA produces a report that is inconsistent with White House messaging, when you see the people who wrote the report saying that Tren de Aragua, the gang, is not driven by Venezuela, they get fired, 47 security clearances lifted. What message do you think that sends inside the intelligence community? The message it sends is that if you write a report or say something that is inconsistent with Donald Trump or the White House's narrative, your job is on the line. And the problem with that, of course, is we spend $90 billion a year to have the ground truth. We have unbelievable technology and people who take amazing risks so that we can go to the president and say, we know that this is true. What happens when we go the route that Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard are taking the intelligence community? We go back to the world where George W. Bush and his CIA director said that it was a slam dunk that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And, you know, years later and thousands of Americans' lives lost in Iraq on bad intelligence. That's where you go when your intelligence community stops telling you the truth.
What's your assessment of Russia right now? There were the drones that came down in Poland. Do you believe that Russia is going to further test the NATO alliance? Do you believe that Russia could further test it to see if Article 5, if it is triggered, whether NATO allies actually do come to the defense of one of the member nations?
Absolutely, Katie. I mean, I was just sort of talking about this in the context of Netanyahu. Look, the Russians or Putin in particular, may be a vile and evil human being, but he's no dummy, right? And he's now heard Donald Trump say 3 or 4 times, oh, this is your last warning. 2 weeks from now, there's going to be all hell broken loose. 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. And there is never a follow-up from the Trump administration. I mean, remember when Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly and carry a big stick? Donald Trump speaks really, really loud and doesn't have any stick. And Vladimir Putin knows that. And so, yes, of course, he's going to keep testing the alliance. He's going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until Donald Trump finally finds the brass or flips in his head and decides that Putin is a bad guy instead of his buddy. Until that moment happens, Putin is going to keep pushing, including inside NATO states, as he did last week.
Let me ask you about the moment as well, the Charlie Kirk stuff. Do you feel safe right now? What would it take for you to feel safe if you don't?
You know, when you go into this job, you assume the risk that is pretty horrible. And I know we're having a long conversation about security and should we have $15,000 or $20,000. You know what we should do? We should shut the hell up and be solemn and dignified in the face of a tragedy, right? I got to tell you, one of my worst moments in my decade and a half in Congress was that day that Charlie Cook was killed. And some of the Republican members, well known now, decided that they would seize that moment without a fact in the world, not to be solemn, not to urge calm, not to remind us of the angels of our better nature, but to say, you did this to the Democrats. It's your fault. By the way, this is the message coming out of the Oval Office. This is both a way to get more violence and less safety, and also the hallmark of somebody who has no business in a position of leadership. A leader takes a deep breath. A leader sort of waits for the facts to come out. And regardless of what those facts are, a leader says, we don't do violence in this country. We resolve our disagreements peacefully and in a democratic fashion. And by the way, the American people should look at their own congressmen, should look at their own governors. I'm going to call out Spencer Cox of Utah, who's been doing a beautiful job in trying to take down the temperature. But look at your senator, look at your governor, look at your member of Congress. And if they didn't say, deep breath, calm down. In this country, we don't have enemies. We have people who disagree with us, and that's a strength of this country. If they didn't take that tack, fire them. Fire them now.
I was just going to ask you about Spencer Cox. One last question on that. How do you feel about social media?
You know, it's such a problem, Katie. There's no question that social media is one of the prime destructive players in this. One of the best things I've done in my life, by the way, was to take a break from social media in the month of August, and I became a whole new person. But that's just me. The reason this is such a problem, Katie, is that it's gasoline on the fire, and people die because of the algorithms, because they get a very small percentage of people, but a dangerous percentage of people enraged. And the trouble, of course, is that with the First Amendment, we have no ability to really in any meaningful way regulate the kind of ideas, which, by the way, I fully support. I pledge every 2 years to support the First Amendment. But it's a conundrum for us because there's no question that social media is making an already dangerous atmosphere really, really toxic.
Yeah, it's on all of us to as the governor says, log off and touch grass. I was going to call you Governor Himes. I almost promoted you. Congressman Himes, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for the wide-ranging discussion.